And then at one point they're asking him like, "Oh, well, what are you gonna do now? What's next for the former clown prince of crime?" And Joker just kind of looks out, like with no emotion in his eyes at all, like on the panel. He just looks out and he says, "I'm going to kill every single person in this room." And everyone's like, "Oh!" There's like this nervous laughter, and Dr. Whopper's just like, "Oh, he's joking. And it's like, I'm not joking." Hello, and thank you for checking out the video. I just want to let you know that I not only create content on my YouTube channel, Class in the Glass, but I'm also on Twitch, where I review movies, cartoons, and TV shows live, while also playing single-player games and multiplayer games. I also have a Patreon where subscribers have access to hundreds of video and audio commentaries for films and cartoons, as well as podcasts and videocasts. In the meantime, thank you again for watching. Enjoy the video. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next part of my show, and I'm happy to debut the first true episode of Comic Book Corner, in which I take a single-issue comic or graphic novel and review it, dissect it with you guys. Talk about what I like about it, what I dislike about it, talk about its legacy, its impact, cultural, sociopolitically, the story itself, the characters, the world, really getting into the specifics with this medium chat, which again, it's a medium that I grew up with, and I was very passionate for a long time, and I've kind of fallen out of comics since over the last several years, and so I'm excited to start revisiting it, rereading things that I fell in love with, made me fall in love with the medium, but also checking out some new stuff too. But today we are starting with The Dark Knight Returns. And for those that are unfamiliar with the book, it's created by Frank Miller, and it was originally released as a 4-issue miniseries in 1986. And The Dark Knight Returns features Bruce Wayne, now in his mid-50s, coming out of retirement to fight crime, the Gotham City Police Department, and a corrupt United States government. The story also features the return of numerous other characters, including Harvey Dent as Two-Face, Superman, and Batman's arch nemesis, the Joker. Before getting into the specifics of the book, I did want to talk about how I was initially exposed to comics and Batman. And really, it did all start with Batman. For those that don't know, I was first introduced to the idea of superheroes through Batman. And it all started with Batman the Animated Series in the mid 1990s, when they were debuting new episodes of the show from the DCAU. That's what started the DCAU, as Batman Animated Series, and then later on, obviously, with the new Batman adventures, like that world that Bruce Timm and all of his other collaborators created. It blew me away. It opened up my mind and my imagination to superheroes and comic book characters, and from that eventually saw at the time the Burton movies, 89 Batman Returns, and yes, even the Schumacher films as well. But then, later after that, I started collecting Batman comics, and then like other, comic book characters I started looking into. Thankfully, there was a lot of, animated shows at the time. So I was watching X-Men the Animated Series and Spider-Man the Animated Series. And so I was collecting, Batman comics, Spider-Man comics, X-Men comics. Those were kind of like the big, most popular heroes, certainly when I was a kid. It's not like how it is now, everyone's like, oh, it's all about the Avengers. Back in the day, it was the X-Men, Back in the day, it was like the Justice League. So being able to experience comics in such a positive way through Batman the Animated Series, I think was, certainly great for me. It's a really nice gateway. It's a really cool first impression to the world of comics. And, one of the first kind of like collected graphic novels, because for so long I was just buying like single issue comics, older Spider-Man comics and Batman comics and things. But like, yeah, one of the first, actual like graphic novels that I did buy was The Dark Knight Returns, with my own hard-earned money. And, before getting into like the book itself, I did want to talk about the impact and the multi-decade long influence The Dark Knight Returns has had on the comic book medium and genre content in general. This book, in the next few years, Chad, it's going to be it's going to be 40 years old. Pretty much where we've been living in the 40-year legacy of The Dark Knight Returns. by many, the book is considered, I think by many, including myself, as, one of the best works of the comic book medium. It not only, I think, reintroduced more mature tones and stories to comics, but it helped reinvigorate the medium. It acted as a gateway to get into comics and helped, I think, usher in interest in comic book adaptations due to its, at the time, radical approach, especially with Batman. For Batman alone, it helped get the character and his stories to be more grounded and gritty again. Although the medium was reintroducing more mature storylines in the 1970s for numerous comic book characters. It didn't start with The Dark Knight Returns. But Batman was still very much defined by the Adam West take on the character from the original 60s Batman live-action series. And was also restricted, I feel like, for a long time due to the Comic Code Authority. This book and many other stories like it, like The Killing Joke, for instance, I think helped usher in a new era for Batman comics that allowed, and encouraged Warner Brothers to greenlit films like Batman '89 and then to do Batman the Animated Series. I feel like a lot of those interpretations owe a lot to The Dark Knight Returns and other Batman stories that were coming out around the same time or immediately after. Now, listen, as positive an impact that this book has had over the last 40 years, it has generated a fair share of criticism, and its influence on other creators, I think, has been mixed, to say the least. The sequel, which, yes, this book does as a sequel, The Dark Knight Strikes Again, is regarded as being an extremely poor follow-up, especially compared to the original work. Of course, Frank Miller, he wrote the story, he did the art, he did the penciling, of course, and look, I think it looks great. I think it reads very well. But, Frank Miller has had a history of substance abuse and alcoholism, and he's had his own battles of the bottle, and honestly, he crawled in that bottle, and that bottle won, for a very long time. And I think that reflected in his work and his change of opinions and the change of his socio-political perspective on certain things led to some pretty poor works in my opinion. I think that was very much the case with The Dark Knight Strikes Again. Outside of the sequel, others have complained how violent and brutal Batman's methods are in the story. And most certainly his conflict with Superman, I think, has been used to define the relationship between the two characters for decades in some of the worst ways possible. Not to say that we haven't had great Batman and Superman content where they team up and they work together like we absolutely have across multiple mediums. But Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is heavily influenced by The Dark Knight Returns in the worst ways possible. Like, there's so much of Zack Snyder's vision of Batman and Superman is based on Frank Miller's take on the characters in his Elseworlds story. And I think when you're trying to establish a cinematic universe, that's probably not what you want to base it on, is that story. There's a reason why this is, at least initially, it was this standalone 4-issue miniseries set in this kind of corporate-controlled, corrupt, dystopian, 1980s world, and deciding, you know what, we're going to go ahead and we're going to make that just that's going to be the foundation of our entire cinematic universe. I'm like, I don't think you should do that, because you are then preventing yourself from later on adapting all sorts of other great works for Batman and Superman actually work together and who are friends, and sadly, so much of Zack Snyder's tonal decisions seem to be based around The Dark Knight Returns. Again, not the book's fault. It's just he just clearly was obsessed with that book, learned the wrong lessons from it, and adapted that into his movie and created, in my opinion, one of the absolute worst comic book films ever made, ever put to screen. Also, I think, additionally, in the 90s, the 90s era comics, I think they learned the wrong lessons from this story and others like it. Like this is a very dark story, no doubt about it. You know, Batman Year One, very dark, also written by Frank Miller. You know, and of course he had Alan Moore, the Killing Joke and everything, all very dark, grounded Batman stories. And people went, whoa, this is like really cool. This is really interesting. Let's start doing this more and more and more of other characters and heroes. And they did, and actually in quite well. Like, I think the creators of Spider-Man Kraven's Last Hunt drew inspiration. I think they pointed to the Dark Knight Returns as like, we want to actually kind of do our own Dark Knight Returns with Spider-Man, except we want to use maybe one of his, you know, not to say lesser known characters, but a supporting villain that I think hasn't been used well all that often. That was Kraven the Hunter. And I think they crafted a great story, and it had a very dark tone. You know, which, you know, Kraven's like, I'm done, kidnaps Spider-Man, buries him alive, pretends to be Spider-Man for like 2 or 3 weeks. Is actually better than Spider-Man. Spider-Man unburies himself, goes after Kraven. Kraven's like, I don't care, man. The conflict's over. I'm better than you. And then, you know, Spider-Man goes home, collapses Mary Jane's arms, and cries. And Kraven, he spends a great evening alone, takes a nice hot bath, eats a nice meal, drinks some bourbon, goes up to his bedroom, pulls out a shotgun, puts it in his mouth, and boom, blows his brains out, you know? All that story, I think, owes a lot to Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. But during the 90s, you had a lot of people during that time, you know, Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, who said, oh, yeah, no, we're going to make all of our characters like super, super dark. And what sometimes happens when you do like a super, super dark story, you become like an edgelord. You have edgelord sensibilities. And then we started getting stuff like Spawn. You know, we started getting stuff like Venom. You know, Lethal Protector and all that, where because it's taking itself so super serious that it just comes off unintentionally funny consistently. There's a reason why the 90s is looked down upon in terms of comics, not comic book adaptations. There are plenty of great comic book adaptations in the 90s, you know, animated and live action, most certainly. But like that was a pretty rough decade for comic books in general. Certainly, it just seemed to be dominated by those edgelord creators and with their edgelord sensibility. So, The Dark Knight Returns, I think, has had a very positive impact in the medium and outside of it. And also, you know, it has had a bit of negative impact. You know, again, probably not the intention of Frank Miller and the people that worked on it, but that's what happened, I feel like. But, you know, moving on from the impact and influence of the book, I kind of want to handle each. I want to go ahead and I want to dissect every issue within this 4-issue miniseries. And again, moving on from the impact and influence of the book, I want to talk about the story and the artwork itself. I absolutely love this 80s corporate dystopian world that Frank Miller and his collaborators, Klaus Janson and Lynn Varley, have created. You know, it almost feels influenced by the works of John Carpenter's, like Assault on Precinct 13, in which these gangs are trying to attack this police department and like Escape from New York, just in terms of like its aesthetics and like the streets being filled with trash and homelessness is on the rise and crime is on the rise. Everything almost feels like Gotham itself is a prison. And, you know, in the world of The Dark Knight Returns, you know, Gotham has just gotten worse since Batman has retired and is plagued by an increase in crime, this new street gang called the Mutants, and just numerous socio-political inequalities, and just an apathetic government run by Ronald Reagan. I also really like how, before you even get to like the first issue, there's this kind of like, again, additional world building, this really cool opening newspaper article that's written by Jimmy Olsen, or as it says in his byline, James Olsen. He doesn't go by Jim anymore. It's James Olsen, and it's him going to this villains bar, or this bar for like retired superheroes and supervillains and like D-list characters where they can just kind of like, you know, drown their sorrows in a bottle and remember the good old days, the golden era as it's called. Like based on like Jimmy's descriptions, like the Martian Manhunter, John Jones, he's like the bartender in it, and like he's aged and he's like really depressed. Like they reference some of the characters that are still going there, like Oswald, Oswald Cobblepot the Penguin. He's like an alcoholic, and they're all talking about all their different adventures and exploits and crimes and heroics. And they've always mentioned Superman's brought up and Wonder Woman's brought up and everywhere else, but the one person they don't bring up in all their stories of the Golden Age is Batman, because in this world he was terrifying. In this world, he's the person you don't want to go up against. They describe he's mean, he's cruel, he's brutal, and he went away like 10 years ago. No one knows what happened to him. Some think he's dead, some wish he was dead, and they just don't want to encounter him like ever again. And then after that great article by Jimmy Olsen, we then immediately cut to the story itself, where we're introduced to, Bruce Wayne, who is now retired. He's in his mid-50s, I think. I think they say he's 55 at one point. I think he's like mid or late 50s. And this is a Bruce Wayne that hasn't been Batman for 10 years, so he must have retired like when he was 45. And he's restless, he's angry, he's bitter. He's constantly suicidal throughout the entire story. Certainly the opening. I mean, the story opens with him going like, yeah, I just kind of want to die. Where he's participating in this probably charity race or something, and his race car is just malfunctioning and exploding and it's set on fire. And he even says, this would be a good death, but not good enough. He's like, I'm going to push this thing to the limit until he probably dies. But, eventually ejects himself from the car, and, he only has like minor injuries and burns. But you see that, okay, he is clearly not happy, with his life. And we learned that, he has since revealed his identity. Certain, supporting characters from the comics, like Commissioner Gordon, knows that Bruce Wayne is Batman. And, after kind of the whole thing with the race, which Commissioner Gordon's like, are you okay? And they're like drinking, and Bruce is like an alcoholic too. He's constantly, drinking hard liquor. He's constantly drinking wine and everything else. And, Commissioner Gordon's trying to help him to whatever degree he can. Although, I don't know, Commissioner Gordon, he's the cigar smoking, cigarette smoking, tobacco spitting alcoholic too. So probably not the best person to commiserate with your addictions and substance abuse. But even he knows something's wrong with Bruce, and you get a sense, you get a, like, through their initial conversation, like Frank Miller, here and in year one, and certainly with Daredevil, and back in the day, he was great at just writing these really intimate conversations between, I think, male characters. We'll talk about Frank Miller and women in a bit, but just between like two old friends who are just kind of broken down. I think he nails that very, very well. And, in this first part, we just learned that, Bruce, he's constantly like exposed to like the media. Of course, this whole book is like a critique on the society itself during the 1980s, during, the Reagan era, and the sociopolitical aspects of the time that defined the time, and capitalism and greed, and the sensationalist media. And Bruce is, he's constantly exposed to all this there, because the media is always picking up all these stories about like these people, like these nuns were murdered by the Mutant Street Gang. These people were murdered. A family of 5 was killed, and it was only for like $12. And he's just like constantly exposed to this over and over and over again, like it's washing over him. And he starts pretty much either in a drunken stupor or starts hallucinating, thinks about his past. And they redo the origin in a cool way, where it's from like a 55-year-old's perspective, who has been clearly psychotic and has been indulging in substance abuse for 10 years. And so it's like, him reliving it again. And so it's kind of made it refreshing. Pearls and all, chap, pearls and all. And him just going like, I've had enough. And finally coming back as Batman, donning his 70s era costume, which was blue and gray. Remember, it was that blue and gray costume, chat, right? With the yellow bat symbol. And his costume changes throughout the entire series. It gets darker and darker and darker as it goes along, and it loses more in color until it's basically just gray and black. And we also see his relationship like with Alfred. At this point, Alfred's just kind of given up, Alfred, who's probably like 90 years old, has to use a cane, and is still cleaning, Wayne Manor, still caring for Bruce. I think he has this great gag. He's like, well, this is the last bottle of wine that has been like, they've had all these like thousands of bottles of wine in the manor for like years, for like multiple generations, and Bruce just drank through all of that stuff. They really comment on his alcoholism in the beginning, and I do like that. And so, like, at this point, Alfred's just sassy, and he's kind of giving up, and he's like, I'm too old to leave, so all right, I'm gonna sass you this entire time. I'm gonna criticize you, but I still love you, Bruce. He's like, I love you too, Alfred. And then we're also introduced to old villains again. Before we get to like the Joker and Superman. We're introduced initially to Harvey Dent as Two-Face, who has been at Arkham Asylum for quite some time, and therapy has failed him, but thanks to this a psychiatrist, who is just a celebrity chaser, basically just working with the most despicable people to enrich himself. Dr. Bartholomew Walper, I think that's how you say his name, who has a Hitler mustache. He has a Hitler mustache and an afro. It's a very weird design, but he's such a piece of shit. He's been working with Harvey, and they just said, you know what they could probably do, because there've been like recent advancements in skin grafts and plastic surgery, and think, well, I think this will probably help, where they fix Two-Face's face and where he looks normal again. And they put him on this interview circuit and everything, and it just feels like that, corporate media where almost like reality television, like it's put on as spectacle. It's all about the spectacle, right? And of course it doesn't work. It's like, as soon as like Harvey does that first interview, it's reported like, then after the interview, his whereabouts are unknown. Of course, he loses his mind. And that's like one of the other initial things that gets Batman motivated or Bruce Wayne to get back to being Batman again, to put on the cape and cowl. And we see numerous scenes of him stopping crime in a very violent fashion. And again, Frank Miller's artwork here, I think, is quite good. I like the panels. There seem to be like comic books, of course, they have panels, and we do have some just single page like spreads. But I noticed a lot of the paneling is almost like it could be like 16 panels. Anywhere between like 12 or 16 panels on the page, and they're very small. It has like a little bit of dialogue, and it's a lot of like, you have like, the initial action here taking place of Batman, then underneath it, you'll have these reporters. Like there's this constant debate going on between these two different reporters. One who's Lana Lane, who is the editor of the Daily Planet in this world, and like another organization, I think from the Gotham Gazette or something, I forget. And like commenting on Batman's exploits and the impact he's having and the legacy, he's left behind and now returning to, which I really, really like that a lot. It almost feel like it can be a little overwhelming. I never felt like overwhelmed reading the book. It's maybe the color palette is also helps with that. It's not like, it's a colorful book. It actually is. But they use just like a lot of warm colors, and I think because of that, it doesn't feel as overwhelming to the eye because they use so many warm colors in it. And so I kind of like that. I think that was a really smart choice on their part. I don't think a lot of people bring that up, honestly. But yeah, after basically Harvey, he goes nuts and starts doing the same things that he'd always done. He kind of looks like Hush, funny enough, which is weird because he bandages his entire head, and he starts committing all of his crimes and everything. And we have this, like, there's this great line that Harvey says, like, when he confronts Batman again, or when Batman confronts him. And, basically Harvey is just broken. He's just doing this because it's the only thing he's known how to do for the last however many decades, that he's been Two-Face. And he's like, look what they see. Look, what do you see, Batman? It's like, at least at this point, both faces match. At least both sides match. And even though he looks like normal, Batman, I think at one point he says, I close my eyes and I listen to the voice and I open them again and I see him for what he is. And it's like his entire face is scarred, and Bruce takes pity on Harvey. He still wants to help him despite everything, but he sees that he's just so thoroughly broken, and he was exploited. He was exploited, by these people. He was put on a pedestal and shown off like this shiny new toy for all of Gotham to see, but he was never fixed. He was still a broken, sick man, and I like that. And then of course we have the Joker. The Joker is introduced in the first book. And in the beginning, the Joker has been catatonic for years. And he he hasn't said anything. All he does is stare at people and look at people. He's like listless. And it's not until all the news reports begin reporting on Batman, and obviously his confrontation of Harvey, that like when the Joker sees on the TV, like there's this great like multiple panels where the Joker's looking up at the TV, like in the commune area, right? In the rec area where all the other people in Arkham are, and he looks up, like probably sitting in his own mess, and he sees that, and he's like, and he finally says Batman. He says, "Darling," and it's like, oh, and he's back. He's finally back, and also comments this book. I mean, which I'm sure there are other Batman books that comment on this before, most definitely. But I feel like this book kind of comments on Batman's effect on Gotham's criminals. And the idea of escalation, which was brought up in the Nolan films, in the Batman Nolan films, certainly in Batman Begins. Like there was that great ending between Commissioner Gordon and Batman where, Gordon's like, listen, we start carrying semi-automatics, they start carrying automatics. We buy Kevlar, they buy armor-piercing rounds. Batman's like, yeah, and he's like, and you're wearing a mask, jumping off rooftops. What's going to be the thing that goes up against you? And then he reveals the Joker card, and that's it. And so it's like, oh, that's really interesting that it's critiquing that. That's actually like one of the debate that's brought up in the book itself is like Batman's presence brings out craziness in this city. And it's like, yes, he's doing good, but there is a cause and effect. There is both a positive effect with Batman there, and there is a negative effect with Batman there. I was like, wow, I'm actually like that. And again, you got to remember, you got to put this in the context. In 86, like, I don't feel like that was like a thing that was often brought up in Batman comics. Certainly adaptations, I mean, in Adam West, it was like,
some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
Some days you can't get rid of a bomb. Like that was as personal as a Batman conflict would get. How do I get rid of this bomb? Not as is my presence disturbing the city? And I really like that it's commenting on that. And of course, in the first issue, we also see him save the character and her friend who would later become the Robin of this story, of this universe, which is Carrie Kelly. And that's kind of one of the next thing I want to jump into, like, the second issue, which is called The Dark Knight Triumphant. With Carrie Kelly as the next Robin. I like the character. I do. I think she has a really cool design. She really stands out. She's very much wearing her, like, the OG Robin outfit, like the little tight shorts and everything. And she is like really bright colors. If you notice her compared to like everybody else in the book, like she is like really bright colors. And I don't know if that was because, as Batman, he's getting darker and darker and darker and more bitter over time, and his costume changes and gets darker, right? Matches personality and his methods. Like she remains like this kind of like bright spot on all the pages. And I feel like that's because she's still innocent. She still hasn't been exposed to as much horror as Batman has. Certainly has been exposed to some nasty things. It's heavily implied that her parents are drug addicts, and they don't really care for her all that much, and they never follow her or where she goes or ask her how she's doing or where she's been. And, after being saved by Batman, she's inspired to be Robin. And she helps him in this issue and every, the next two issues afterwards. But they don't really get too much into her relationship with Bruce and Batman and Alfred. They just kind of like, yeah, you're the new Robin. Okay. And I think it's, and this is my criticism. Like, I like Carrie Kelly, but I feel like there could have been I feel like they could have done more with her in the story, but clearly Frank Miller was just like, I am very just laser focused on everything's from Batman's perspective, and it's his story. And I'm critiquing, the socio-political systems that were in place, at the time, where she's kind of lost in all that. Again, she's not necessarily bad, but, and I do like her, but there's just not a lot of interesting things about her. I think she has a great design. I like that she's helpful, and she's very earnest, but I would have actually liked to learn more about her, in this story. I would have liked to have really gone into the relationship between them, because it's kind of just like the relationship is just there automatically after she saves Bruce, at one point in the story. And that's like I would say my first big criticism of the book. And this is also where we introduce, like, we already had them before. You know, it's kind of one of the things that sets Bruce off when he goes back to Crime Alley. He's encountering these two mutant kids, basically, the muties who want to kill him. I do like the design for the mutants. Matter of fact, I feel like Bruce Timm and the people that worked on Batman Beyond were influenced by this section. Because I feel like even the beginning of Batman Beyond and some of the designs and background characters, the mutants are like seen in that series, which I think is cool. And it's very dystopian. It's very Mad Max. It's very it's like a combination of cyberpunk and Mad Max when it comes to the aesthetics of the mutants. They're like kind of retro futuristic punks, right? The street gang. And you know, the regular gang members aren't exactly intelligent. They're just brutal. They're just vicious. But they are wrangled by the mutant leader, who's just this hulking fucking behemoth who is committing like all these heinous crimes and murders. And he doesn't even, I mean, the only reasons why he seems to be doing it is because he just relishes the violence. You know, he loves it, you know. And, you know, obviously, you know, Batman, there's that famous panel, that famous sequence where after, you know, Batman you know, initially fights the mutant leader and Batman is nearly killed. You know, Carrie Kelly saves him, goes back to the Batcave. You know, the mutant leader's arrested, put in prison, murders his lawyer in a horrific fashion. There's this great shot where Commissioner Gordon's like, oh my God, let me shoot him. Because I guess he like literally ripped his lawyer apart with his bare hands because he's huge. Batman basically says, like, I have to beat him in front of all of his followers in order to destroy this game, in order to break it completely. That's the only way. I can't do it. Him going to prison is just going to galvanize all these people. And so he basically, you know, works with Commissioner Gordon. I forget if he works with Commissioner Gordon or in any case, he basically allows the mutant leader to escape, and he ends up in like this giant fucking just, you know, shit pit just filled with mud and everything else and human feces and urine and everything. And Batman and him just fucking throw down in there. And like the Batman explains to him, like, this, you don't understand. This isn't a fight, okay? This isn't a battleground. This is an operating table, and I am the surgeon. And he just starts breaking every single bone in his body. He rips every muscle. He cracks every bit of cartilage. I mean, he completely breaks this man to the point where he's nothing. He's just a lump. He's just a lump of meat that can breathe. And it, you know, it basically forces the mutants to disband. But what happens after that, because of that, they're like, well, we all want to be like Batman. And so then they create the Sons of Batman. And they're their own vigilante group, and they start. Yes, they are doing acts of vigilantism, and sometimes it's good, but a lot of times they're being incredibly violent, and they almost become anarchist. And this is where we're introduced to the character of Commissioner Ellen Yindel, and this is in the 3rd issue of Hunt the Dark Knight, where after the whole thing with the mutant leader and everything happened, now the Sons of Batman have arrived. You know, Commissioner Ellen Yindel, she's taken over for Commissioner Gordon, who has since retired, since he's in the 70s at this point. And she has a very anti-Batman policy, and she wants to use all the resources at her disposal, both in Gotham and also from the United States government, to try to take down Batman because she thinks he is a horrible influence on Gotham and is causing this escalation in violence. And it was always kind of hinted at beforehand, like, of some other characters at one point where, like, on a answering machine, we hear a message from, like, Catwoman, Selena Kyle. We hear a message from, like, Superman at this point. This one where I think properly introduced to Superman in this story, and where he is pretty much this stooge. He's this American lapdog of Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan's like, Superman, I want you to go in that direction. I want you to stop those goddamn commies. I want you to stop the Soviets and Corto Maltese, which Corto Maltese, funny enough, was also mentioned in Batman '89, which is like that's where remember the pictures that Jack Nicholson Joker is looking at that Kim Bassinger's Vicky Vale took. That's in Corto Maltese. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool little reference to that. You know, that works. Another little influence there it had. And, you know, I in the context of the story, it works that, like, you know, Superman is now this lapdog of Reagan's America and everything. He just, you know, he basically just tell him to fetch and he fetches, you know. But I think this story has had a negative impact on Superman as a character, because I think so many people have been exposed to this book and they see the interpretation of Superman and they think that's what he is, that he is just this stooge, that he is just this American lapdog, that, you know, that he'll do whatever the government tells him to do, and etc. And I don't like that. And I think it's, again, it works in the context of the story that Frank Miller is telling, but I think some people have formulated this opinion. That's the way Superman is across the board. It's like, that's just not true. And that has always kind of stuck in my craw. That's always kind of bothered me to a degree. Where, at this point, Superman's like telling Bruce, like, you gotta stop doing this, okay? Ronnie Reagan's not happy. All right, the government's not happy, the city's not happy, and he's just like, I would hate to have to do anything, Bruce. And, and Bruce is like, I'd hate to have it to do anything else, Clark. I'd hate to have it escalate to that point, the two of us going up against each other. And Superman's like, I'm sure you would. And then he leaves. I even like how, like, he's introduced. He's just that symbol of American freedom. Like, at one point, like, he has his leg on top of this mountaintop, or like, this like stone, and a fucking bald eagle just lands on his arm, like out of nowhere. It's like, oh my God. And I feel like that image is just what people think of when they think of Superman. He's not that. He's not an American, government agent. He's not a government stooge. And it is disappointing that for so many that they have used that and applied that to interpret Superman, certainly of Zack Snyder, where he's this guy, he's an idiot. And I was like, ugh. Also, this is the book in which we really get to see the Joker's grand plan in action. Where obviously in the first issue and certainly in the second issue, the Joker has kind of had his B plot, and where he's basically getting all these resources. He's now working with Dr. Bartholomew Whopper, who wants to capitalize on the Joker's sudden like, oh, I want to reform, I want to do the interview circuit. And Whopper's like dollar signs in his eyes, and what they do with the Joker here, I think, is absolutely fantastic. Also, it's a very different take on the Joker in terms of his look. Oftentimes the Joker in the comics, he's very lean, he's very skinny, almost emaciated. Here, he's just as broad as Batman. He has like these almost like a Tim Burton design. He has these very broad shoulders. He's like V. He's got a hell of a huge long neck. He's got a hell of a jaw. And you can see over the years, like, his hair is green, but it's definitely not as green as it used to be. And he's like, he has to dye, he has to put on his makeup, he has to put on the red lipstick and everything, right? Basically getting back into character. And of course you have that great sequence where, because the Joker has basically tricked everyone in Arkham, as he usually does, they're going to put him out there for interview circuit, which is clearly like David Letterman's show. Even the character, the interviewer, looks like David Letterman, like some late night show. And the Joker just so calmly explains like what he's going to do, and he gets some like really iconic lines like in this part of the graphic novel where the David Letterman basically asks him, Joker, is it true that you've killed about 600 people across your criminal escapades? And the Joker's like, I don't keep count. It's like, oh my God, it's so cold. And then at one point, they're asking him like, oh, well, what are you going to do now? What's next for, the former clown prince of crime? And Joker just kind of looks out, like with no emotion in his eyes at all, like on the panel. He just looks out and he says, I'm going to kill every single person in this room. And everyone's like, oh, there's like this nervous laughter. And Dr. Whopper's just like, oh, he's joking. And it's like, I'm not joking. And then he ends up killing Dr. Whopper, which he deserves. And he gasses the entire audience and David Letterman with these weird, like, androids that his gross friend created. Like, there are these robots that release this gas and just, they absolutely kill everybody. He kills the other guests on the show. He kisses this woman, and because his lipstick is laced with this poison, and it makes her go insane. She has this rictus grin, and so he ends up killing. I think they even say, like, there were, like, over 200 people in that audience, and they're all dead. And the whole staff is dead. And the thing is, so often, because I've talked about this, when I read a Batman comic, I hear the voices of like Kevin Conroy as Batman, which I do hear for this, and I often hear Mark Hamill's the Joker. But for whatever reason, the way that the Joker plays it in this, the way the Joker is written here, and his mannerisms, and the matter-of-fact way he's speaking, I don't really hear Mark Hamill's Joker at all. It almost comes across, if anything, it's almost like he's just kind of bored, by everything. And he's just like, this is just a lead up to my final act. and I don't really hear Mark Hamill until like later on, where Batman finally is on the screen and where he seems to finally come alive again. Because everything else, he's just so, everything is so understated. But when Batman arrives, and Batman's like, I'm done. I'm absolutely done. And when he chases him to the carnival where he starts, and that's the other thing too, he ends up killing dozens of children at this carnival. I think they lace this cotton candy with rat poison or something. They lace it with something, and all these children die horrifically. And Batman is just like, God damn it. And he goes out, and he, like, at one point, I think where Joker has a hostage. He has one of those kids hostage, and Batman's like, fuck it. And he throws the batarang, and this goes right inside of his eye. He's like, oh, what the fuck? I think that Joker's like, what the fuck? He didn't expect that, like, at all. And when you read that for the first time, it's like, whoa. I mean, listen, we've already seen Batman do, like, horrifically violent things throughout the comic at this point, but him just blinding the Joker with a battery that's embedded in his fucking eyeball, it's like, oh, right? And even, and before that, like, the Joker assaults, this is my other criticism, he assaults Selina Kyle, Catwoman, who is now this obese madam working at this prostitute ring. And and again, like Frank Miller, for whatever reason, he loves to write women as prostitutes, as whores. He does the same thing with Catwoman in year one, where she starts out as a prostitute, as a working girl, a lady of the night. And he's like, well, I did in year one, I'm going to do it here too. And I don't like that. And again, they don't do anything interesting with Selina Kyle. The only thing, the two things that define her is that she's lonely and she's fat. That's it. That's all they do with her. And at one point, Bruce, like, makes out with her violently. and then it's going on. And so, yeah, a lot of the female characters, Frank Miller doesn't seem to know what to do with them at all, except make them whores or, have their parents be drug addicts. So that's a little frustrating. But back to the Joker. And then, of course, we're at the carnival. And that entire sequence where Joker's fucking, first of all, I just like that he's like, what, you crazy son of a bitch? Like, he's so upset that Batman gouged his eye out with a batarang.
Are you out of your mind?
And they eventually go in the Tunnel of Love, and Joker's shooting and murdering all those people, and then they have that final confrontation in the tunnel, and Joker is just horrifically stabbing him, and Batman's like, fuck this, and accidentally snaps his neck. He doesn't mean to, but he does. And, it shocks people, which at that point, I'm like, fucking do it, Batman, kill him. I wouldn't have been upset by that, honestly. And, the Joker is just like, oh, no witnesses, and you still can't do it. You still can't kill me after everything I've done. Well, you disappoint me, darling. I'll finish. I mean, and he somehow, I don't know how you could do this. Is it physically possible to snap one's neck? Because he's paralyzed. That's the thing. Like, Batman broke his neck, and he's paralyzed from the neck down. He can't move. And he then proceeds to, like, which is kind of, when I first read this as a kid, it was like, Jesus, this is really graphic. And they have that text where it's just like, it just builds that crack until it finally snaps. And then you can hear, like, they do the little, like, word bubbles for, like, the bones crunching, like, the crunch and critch. And I was like, oh, man. And he's just sitting there, like, with this open mouth smile, right, as he's dead. And then Batman, and then that's where, Yindel and all her officers and everything, and all the resources that she has at her disposal, they go after Batman, and, Batman ends up burning the Joker's body. And he's still, but in the fire, you still see him. It's a really creepy image where you could see his molten skeleton still smiling at Batman. But then that pretty much then leads into the United States government, like, getting involved and saying, like, all right, we're done with all this. We're done with this vigilante. So, sure, man, go to Ronnie Reagan, go to President Reagan. So, like, sure, man, I want you to go to Gotham, and I want you to kill him. I want you to kill Batman, right? And also just Gotham at this point is kind of fallen to anarchy because another contingent of the mutant gang has now basically become the Jokers from Batman Beyond. Like, they've split. You have the Sons of Batman, you have the Jokers, like all these different gangs now, and the city is just, it's boiled over. It's chaos. It's looting everything. And, Batman, along with Carrie Kelly, they have to, like, take control again. And they eventually get the Sons of Batman and then the Sons of Joker, whatever they're called, to fight against just the anarchy in the city. And there's this great line too, where at one point, like, they're gonna use guns, and Batman grabs the guns, like, we do not use these. These are weapons of the enemy, and he breaks it, which I like that. It's a nice image. During all this too, we're also seeing what Superman usually does for the United States government, and he goes to Corto Maltese since the Soviets are there trying to control the country, right? And America doesn't want them there. They end up releasing a nuclear weapon. I think the United States uses a nuclear weapon in Corto Maltese, and it's very Watchmen-esque too. Which it's funny, these books came out around the same time, I believe, right? And where a nuke goes off, and it pretty much nearly kills Superman, and he's like this emaciated like skeleton. I mean, he's just gross looking, and he literally, in order to stay alive, he's so gaunt and everything like that, like his skin's falling off his bones. He starts absorbing the energy from all the plant life and animals around him. And it's like, oh my God, it's like really disturbing. Then eventually he flies up and he gets that sun. But then he's told, like, hey, go to fucking Gotham and stop Batman from doing such a great, because that's all the news reports starting to say, like, Batman's is taking control of the city and looting has stopped, violence has stopped, and it makes, Ronald Reagan and the United States government look like, a bunch of inept pieces of shit. So then, Superman has to go there, and then we get, certainly an iconic fight between Batman and Superman. Again, I still have mixed feelings about this, because I feel like this conflict has defined so much of Batman and Superman's relationship across different interpretations of the two characters' relationship in different mediums for decades. And that's always been frustrating. I mean, certainly with Batman v Superman, which has bothered me, I mean, anyone says, like, I don't think Batman v Superman's based on Dark Knight Returns. It obviously is. He's wearing Batman's wearing pretty much the same exact armor that he wore in that movie. But I don't know. It's like, it's certainly cool, and I love the illustrations and the drawings and everything like that, and seeing these two square off, and finally seeing, like, Batman, he plugged his fucking suit. They end up fighting in Crime Alley. He plugs the suit. He has, like, a goddamn plug, and he plugs it in the lamp. Into the goddamn lamppost, and he's like, all right, let's fucking go. Like, I'm gonna, like, take that off. But to be fair, there's nothing here introduced to this book. I forgot to mention Oliver Queen does come in as Green Arrow, and he is as crazy as ever. He is as liberal as ever, chap. Very much a leftist liberal. And he hates Superman. He uses a kryptonite arrow to weaken Superman, which then allows Batman to start pummeling the shit out of Superman. But because of all the stress and the strain of using the suit, it seemingly causes Batman to have a heart attack, and he dies right there. And then, Alfred's like, all right, fuck it. Alfred burns down Wayne Manor, and then he has a heart attack and dies. Or it's implied he commits suicide. I think it's implied he commits suicide because he takes, like, a pill. And so it makes me think, like, did Bruce have a conversation? Alfred's like, now, listen, Alfred, you're gonna have to kill yourself, which is really dark to me. That's like, wow. But I think it's implied that, like, Alfred, like, takes a pill and burns down the match and kills himself. It's like, wow. And so then they, it's the funeral, basically, and Carrie Kelly's there and everything, like, representing, the Wayne estate, I guess. I think Bruce, like, left everything to her or something. But then Superman, who's also there mourning, hears Bruce's heartbeat, and he goes, he faked it. And he winks at Carrie Kelly and he leaves. And then, like, the ending is basically, I think, Carrie Kelly, whoever, like, digging him up. And they then go underneath the Batcave. So the caverns underneath the Batcave, where they've set up shop with the Sons of Batman, the former Sons of the Joker, or whatever the other gangs are, so he can train just a new era of crime fighters and create a better future for Gotham and the world. And that's how the story wraps up. Now, originally, Frank Miller wanted to give it a more tragic ending. His intention was to kill Batman. Like, Batman was supposed to die at the end of The Dark Knight Returns. But I think the editors said, like, let's make it a little more hopeful. And he's like, all right, fine. So they gave it a little more hopeful ending. Sadly, that led to, The Dark Knight Strikes Again, which, again, is horrible. I haven't read the other sequels that came after it. I can't speak on those, but I haven't really heard many great things, to be honest. But yeah, overall, I love this book, despite some of its issues. And I do have some issues. I think Carrie Kelly's underwritten, and I really don't think Frank Miller knows how to write women very well, except them as whores. But In terms of the storytelling, the characters and their interactions, the artwork, the colors that are used. I really love the warm color palette in this book. The socio-political themes that are being openly discussed between the main characters or even the tertiary like reporters. I think all of that is handled extremely well. It's so good how they are able to tackle all these things and be so comprehensive, and also to being like a biting political satire of the times of 80s of Ronald Reagan's 80s America. I think that was also like really great. You know, it certainly has had a bit of a negative impact in terms of interpretation of certain characters and what led to the 90s era of comics, but I still think it's done more good than bad, and you know, it has earned its place as one of the great comic book stories of the last 40 years. It's one that's very close to my heart, and one that I was actually very, very happy to reread. I think this book is very special, and I want to thank people for voting on it for this first episode of Comic Book Corner. But those are my thoughts on The Dark Knight Returns. I'm definitely going to look into what you guys are saying about this book. What do you like about it? What do you dislike about it? And you know, what would you like to see me do in the future for Comic Book Corner? Let me know, and hope you enjoyed the show.